December 1944. The Allied armies believed the war was almost over. Paris had been liberated. Hitler was on the run. And soldiers on the Western Front spoke of being home by Christmas. But deep within the forests of Belgium, beneath the silent snow of the Ardennes, the German army was preparing one final, desperate gamble, a counterattack that would shock the world and plunge Europe into one of the bloodiest battles of the Second World War. The plan was audacious: to split the Allied lines, capture the critical port of Antwerp, and force the Western powers to negotiate peace. Hitler called it Wacht am Rhein, watch on the Rhine. The Allies never saw it coming. In the early hours of December 16th, the silence of the Ardennes exploded into thunder. Thousands of German guns unleashed a storm of fire across 70 miles of forest. It was the beginning of what history would call the Battle of the Bulge, and within that chaos, in two tiny villages named Krinkelt-Rocherath, a small group of American infantrymen would make their stand. To most, they were just another line on the map. But to the German 6th SS Panzer Army, Hitler's elite armored force, those villages were the key to victory. The road through Krinkelt-Rocherath led straight to the heart of the Allied supply lines. If the Germans could break through here, they would open the path to the Meuse River and beyond. For the men of the U.S. 2nd Infantry Division, there was no retreat, no reinforcements, and no time to prepare. Their orders were simple: hold the line. What followed was not just a battle of bullets and shells, but a test of willpower, endurance, and sacrifice. A fight for every street, every doorway, every frozen breath in the snow. If these villages fall, one American officer later wrote, the entire northern flank collapses. The fate of thousands depends on the men of the 2nd Infantry. And so, in the freezing dawn, as the Tiger tanks rolled out of the mist, the soldiers of Krinkelt-Rocherath prepared to do the impossible. The men who held Krinkelt-Rocherath belonged to the U.S. 2nd Infantry Division, the Indianhead. They were veterans. They had fought through Normandy, bled in the hedgerows of France, and pushed across the German border. When the Ardennes offensive began, many were exhausted, their units battered, their boots torn, and their spirits frayed by months of relentless combat. This was supposed to be a time of rest. On the morning of December 15th, the 2nd Infantry Division was in the process of rotating out of the front lines. Trucks were being prepared. Letters were being written home. Some men joked about finally seeing Paris before Christmas. Then came the thunder. Without warning, artillery shells rained down across their positions. Trees shattered into splinters. Snow turned black. Communication lines were cut in seconds. The men scrambled for cover, clutching rifles, staring into the white fog that hid what was coming, the full weight of Hitler's final gamble. At the front, in command of the defense, stood Colonel Walter M. Higgins of the 38th Infantry Regiment, a tough, disciplined officer, the kind who had seen too much war to believe in luck, but enough of it to trust his men. His orders were clear: hold your ground, no matter what. But Higgins knew the truth. His troops had no heavy armor, limited anti-tank weapons, and barely enough ammunition for a single day of sustained fighting. The nearest reserves were miles away, cut off by the enemy offensive. They were alone. The weather was their enemy too. Temperatures dropped below -15 degrees. The snow was so thick that visibility shrank to a few meters. Men's fingers froze to their weapons. Frostbite spread faster than bullets. Even before the Germans arrived, one soldier wrote later, the cold was already trying to kill us. Yet, in that silence between bombardments, you could sense something else, a grim resolve. These men, weary and ill-equipped, were not about to abandon their post. They had fought too long, lost too many friends, to give up now. As the sun disappeared behind the snow clouds, word spread across the trenches, enemy armor approaching, and the men of the 2nd Infantry tightened their grips on their rifles. They didn't know it yet. But in just a few hours, they would be facing the most powerful armored force Germany had ever sent to the Western Front. The Battle of Krinkelt-Rocherath was about to begin. December 16, 1944. At precisely 5:30 a.m., the German guns opened up. It began with a wall of sound, a rolling thunder that tore through the frozen forest. For nearly 2 hours, the artillery never stopped. Shells screamed overhead and crashed into the American lines, tearing apart trees, trenches, and men alike. Then, through the smoke and snow, came the rumble of engines, Tiger tanks, their iron hulls glistening with frost, crawling forward through the mist. Outnumbered, outgunned, and frozen to the bone. The soldiers of the 2nd Infantry Division braced for the impact. Their radios crackled with fragments of reports. Armor sighted. Multiple panzer columns. They're everywhere. In the fog, the black crosses on the tanks appeared like ghosts. The first shells struck the American outposts, blasting entire squads apart. They just kept coming, one survivor said later. It was like the whole forest was moving. The American line bent, but did not break. Small squads fought house to house in Krinkelt, transforming each building into a fortress. Streets were littered with snow, bricks, and bodies. Flames burst from windows as grenades exploded inside shattered homes. The air smelled of smoke, gunpowder, and frozen blood. A young bazooka team, 2 men from Company E, found themselves trapped between 2 advancing panzers. With no cover left, they crawled through the snow, waited until the tanks were almost upon them, and fired. One rocket hit dead center, setting the first tank ablaze. The second shot disabled another. Both men were killed moments later. But their courage stopped the German advance long enough for others to regroup. Their names were never widely known, but their stand became legend among those who survived. For 2 days, the battle raged without pause. German troops poured in, supported by heavy armor. The Americans, running low on ammunition, scavenged weapons from the dead, friend and foe alike. Krinkelt and Rocherath became hell on earth, a frozen inferno of bullets and smoke. Every street was contested. Every wall had been hit by artillery. We didn't think of victory anymore, another soldier recalled. We just thought about lasting 1 more hour. As the second night fell, Colonel Higgins faced an impossible decision. His men had held the line longer than anyone thought possible, but they were being surrounded. Ammunition was nearly gone. The wounded filled every cellar. The enemy tanks were breaking through from both flanks. There was only one choice left: a fighting withdrawal. To retreat not in panic, but in discipline, step by step, covering each other under fire. The goal was not to escape. It was to buy time under the cover of darkness and snow. The 2nd Infantry began to fall back, every step a struggle, every minute earned with blood. They left behind 2 destroyed villages, hundreds of dead comrades, and the burning wrecks of German armor. But they had done what no one thought possible. They had stopped the SS Panzer advance cold. If only for a moment, that moment would change the course of the entire battle. For the men who survived the first 2 days, the world had shrunk to a frozen maze of trenches, cellars, and snow-covered fields. They were hungry, exhausted, and surrounded. The 2nd Infantry Division had done what no one believed possible. They had stopped the elite SS Panzer divisions, but at a terrible cost. Now in the shattered ruins of Krinkelt and Rocherath, the survivors faced a new enemy. Ammunition was running out. Soldiers counted each bullet, each shell. They shared the last chocolate rations, broke frozen bread into pieces, and melted snow for water. When the ammo ran dry, they scavenged from the fallen German weapons, captured grenades, and even half-broken Panzerfausts. Every shot mattered. Every trigger pull had to count. In the makeshift aid stations, the medics fought their own hopeless war. Supplies were gone. Morphine had run out. They used strips of blankets for bandages and snow to numb the pain. One sergeant wrote later, "We stopped feeling our hands. We stopped feeling fear. All we could feel was the cold." Yet even in this frozen nightmare, the Americans refused to surrender. They turned wrecked jeeps into barricades, buried mines beneath snowdrifts, and used the forests to funnel the German tanks into narrow kill zones. Some men rigged artillery shells with grenades and tripwires, desperate inventions born of survival. The snow that once threatened to kill them now became their greatest ally. The thick white landscape slowed the German armor. Tanks bogged down, wheels froze, and their columns stretched thin. The forest roads became death traps, narrow, winding paths where one hit could block an entire convoy. What the Americans lacked in strength, they made up for with ingenuity and willpower. But the hardest battle wasn't against the tanks. It was against despair. Men spoke less. They stopped counting the days. They looked into the snow and wondered if anyone even knew they were still alive. Commanders like Colonel Higgins had to balance courage with compassion, to order men into impossible situations, and still find the words to keep them standing. Sometimes that strength came from dark humor. Sometimes from a whispered promise, "We'll get out together. If we die here, no one will ever know. But if we hold, maybe someone will make it." On the fifth day, the line could no longer hold. The German pressure was relentless, waves of armor, artillery, and infantry crashing against the last positions of the 2nd Infantry. Orders finally came, withdraw. But even that retreat was not defeat. The men fell back through the forests, covering one another, fighting every step, slowing the German advance inch by inch. By the time they reached the next defensive line, they had done what few armies ever could. They had delayed the SS Panzer Army for nearly 5 full days, and those 5 days changed everything. The time bought by the 2nd Infantry allowed other American units, including the 101st Airborne, to reach Bastogne and fortify it just in time. In the grand chessboard of war, those nameless men in the snow had bought history a few precious hours, and those hours would turn the tide. The soldiers of Krinkelt-Rocherath had no medals waiting, no headlines, no parades, but their defiance, their refusal to give in, became one of the most remarkable stands of the Ardennes. 5 days, 2 villages, and a line that never truly broke. When the guns finally fell silent, nothing remained of Krinkelt-Rocherath. The houses were gone, the streets reduced to rubble, the forest scarred by fire and metal. But beneath that frozen ground lay the legacy of men who refused to yield. The 2nd Infantry Division, surrounded, battered, half-frozen, had held the line for 5 long days. In doing so, they delayed the advance of the 6th SS Panzer Army, Hitler's strongest and most elite force. On paper, it might seem small, a few villages lost and one in the snow. But in war, time is everything. And the time bought at Krinkelt-Rocherath saved Bastogne. Those 5 days allowed the 101st Airborne Division to dig in. It gave Allied command time to react, to shift reserves, to close the breach. Without that stand, the German spearhead could have reached the Meuse River, and perhaps even Antwerp. Strategically, it changed the entire course of the Ardennes offensive. The German timetable shattered. The lightning strike that Hitler promised slowed to a crawl. And once the skies cleared, the Allied air power returned, turning the tide. Once and for all, the Battle of Krinkelt-Rocherath faded into the background of history, overshadowed by names like Bastogne and St. Vith. But among the men who were there, it was never forgotten. They called it the Twin Villages, a place where ordinary men did extraordinary things, not for glory, not for medals, but because they had no other choice. One veteran later said, "We didn't fight for victory. We fought for the man next to us." Today, those villages stand rebuilt, peaceful, quiet, the scars of war hidden beneath their streets. But in the nearby fields, among the pine trees, lie the white crosses of those who never came home. Each one tells a story of courage in the cold, of men who held on. When the world around them fell apart, they were not the heroes the world remembered. They had no headlines, no iconic speeches, but without them, there might have been no victory to remember at all. This was Krinkelt-Rocherath. Two forgotten villages, 5 days of defiance, and a handful of soldiers who in the dead of winter proved that courage needs no audience, only conviction. They fought without glory, so that others could live in peace.